Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Dellert. I am the Director of Strategy for the London Design Festival, and on behalf of the festival, I'd love to welcome you to this year's edition of the Global Design Forum. This year's theme is Design at/from the Seams. Basically, we're looking over the next 3 days at the connectedness between peoples, practices, and the planet, also a radical interdependence. It's at the seams, and these points of connection, where interesting things happen, so we'd like to explore that. Reflecting this spirit, the 2025 program is guest curated by Samta Nadeem, curatorial partner STIR, which is a global media house and curatorial agency championing these intersections across design, architecture, and art. Over the next 3 days, we will talk about creativity, technology, human imagination, and the ethics of plurality. Samta's played with the rhythm of these topics, so there will be some sessions that are interactive and performative, so please make sure that you come back this afternoon and come back tomorrow. We've got a few exciting things for you. Today's topic is speculative certainties, where we're envisaging futures where the unpredictable meets the inevitable. Today's talks are in partnership with Lotus, and if you find yourself in Mayfair, please do go by their showroom. They've got a very cool exhibition on called DNA times DNA, where the heritage meets possibilities. So they're looking at old archive pieces with some new treatments. So this topic is called natural cultures, and I'm getting ready to hand over to Ria Patel to take it away.
Hi everyone, welcome this afternoon to this panel discussion on natural cultures. So I suppose the main topic is getting into the kind of prevailing system of production and consumption and how it fits with the world, the kind of climate crisis and the times that we're living in, and the tensions between those two. So I'm going to ask each member of the panel to introduce themselves before we get into some questions, and then there'll be some time for you to ask some questions as well. So Caroline, do you want to kick off?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. It's really nice to see you. My name's Caroline Till. I'm the co-founder of Franklin Till. So we're a design futures agency. We've been running for 15 years now, and we mainly work with very large brands and organizations to help them to use design and often specifically color and material innovation to shift towards a more sustainable future. I've also spent quite a long time in higher education, so I sort of set up the Material Futures course at Central St Martin's and enjoy contributing to many different higher education courses across the world.
Hello, hi. I'm Guan Li. I founded Grimsdyke Farm 20 years ago. It's a farm that's been converted into a place where we make things and think about things and and play with things. So we care a lot about materials, and we also work with process-driven design with material in mind.
Great. Hi, I'm Seetal Solanki. I am the founder of Matter, but I describe myself as a materials translator. And what that means is I basically take a lot of information that has primarily existed, well, materials have primarily existed in science and academia, and I take that information to make it more relatable for my people. And so I do that in many different ways. I curate, I write, I research, and I build projects out to physicalize them in a way where it feels more tangible and possible. I also teach on many different programs. I used to be positioned at RCA for many years on the textiles program. But yeah, a lot of my practice is very much about giving a different perspective on how you can integrate materials into your life.
Hi everyone. So my name is Marie-Camille Lecoq and I'm head of CMF and sustainability at Lotus. So for some people that are not familiar with CMF, is color and materials finishes. So technically my job is to take care of anything that you see out and inside the car. So of course, from a customer point of view, the touch and feels, but also, the integration of materials into, the habitat, but also how the customer is going to interact, but all trying to also improve the processes, how we make cars too. We are trying to be involved in this too.
Thank you, everybody. So I wonder if we could just kick off by setting the scene of how the design industry has been changing to make itself more sustainable, to recognize this time that we can't be continuing to extract and turning towards renewable materials and different methods of production. But how do you each observe things changing to the industry improving itself in this way? Who wants to go to start?
I guess if I speak more in my area, in the automotive industry, it has shifted massively. When I started 15 years ago, I would say it was not even looked at. I think the idea was just to put a car on the road, and the materials were not something that it was really looked into it. But the big shift happened, I guess in the past 5 years, where definitely there's something that we have to be careful, and from my side we are trying to push a lot more recycled content, but I think is also trying to go beyond just being a greenwashing story. I think we heard a lot of stuff, and it's confusing for a lot of people what is really sustainable. So on my side is trying to understand what makes sense when we build a car that will be more sustainable, but not only for the customer, but also how we build the car for long term. So it's manufacturing processes, air surface, but also B surfaces materials. So we try to go beyond just looking at the beauty of the material itself. We try to understand the meaning and the purpose of it. And and we also design around it, where before we just had the design and try to apply the material itself, where now we try to design around the materials because there is specificities of them that, of course, it doesn't work. You need to make sure, you have to design around it to allow them to be feasible. So it's shifting massively. We are looking at circularity. Transparency is also a big thing we are looking at. We try to control the supply chains, understanding where it comes from and also where it ends. And also longevity, durability, all this kind of stuff is that massively shift, the past couple years, in my industry.
Yeah.
I think, so coming from the perspective of sort of agency side, and we're lucky enough to work with a very broad range, so across electronics, apparel, automotive. And I think we're on a bit of a rocky road at the moment, it feels. I think over the last decade, a huge amount has happened in terms of sustainability, I think in terms of awareness, both from like a citizen mindset and from a brand awareness. However, I am kind of quite concerned, I would say, particularly in the last 2 years, that the conversations are difficult. We're definitely at a point where there is a sort of stepping back away from sustainability initiatives with some of the brands that we're working with or discussing with. I have sat in many difficult executive boardrooms where people say things to me like, but Caroline, we're coming from the perspective of the brand, not the perspective of the planet. And it is very uncertain times. There's a huge amount of global uncertainty. There's, very worrying conflict going on in the world. There's a huge amount of economic uncertainty. And there has been a bit of a rollback. And I'm obviously not speaking about anything specific, but generally from our perspective, a bit of a rollback to focus purely on the bottom line and, you know, really focus on financial metrics. And there's been a bit of a sort of sustainability going covert. You know, we had 5 years, I would say, of brilliant kind of needing to be over, in that citizens were looking for it. You know, people wanted to know that there was a deeper sense of responsibility, both in social and environmental sustainability. And that has dropped off, to be quite honest. People are asking less questions, probably because their lives are very complicated and they are, you know, facing financial pressures. So, yeah, I don't want to paint like a negative picture, because I'm a climate optimist, and, you know, I really believe that we all have a massive role to play. But I have to say, more than ever, I think there needs to be much bolder kind of stance from a top-down perspective, coming from government, and brands have a huge role to play. And I believe that those brands that are making strong statements and really investing in long-term sustainability are the ones that are going to reap the economic benefits. And I think that's the problem, that we're not thinking that at the moment. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
That's fine, we like long-winded answers.
Can I add to that, actually? Because I have even changed the format and structure of my own practice, because I used to consult a lot, and it's not required anymore. So I used to consult on like how to implement more sustainable materials into different industries, and it's an option, and for a lot of these brands to have. So I didn't feel like they were understanding the urgency around how to actually do that kind of work, because it shouldn't be an option, and also it's essential for our long-term kind of like survival. And even considering what survival is now, like I work with a lot of independent designers, and obviously we're here during London Design Festival. A lot of what I see is designers trying to survive by stepping into the art world and less design, because it's more sustainable for them to be able to like survive off that kind of contribution from the art world and be seen to like given, say if they're represented by a gallery, the gallery fronts 50% of production for them to actually create the work. In design, that does not exist. And if you want to put that into a store, for example, your returns are only like 2%. So it's really problematic, the design industry in this place. I find it really challenging to even survive as a creative here. And I think you'll see a lot of designers are treading in lots of different worlds to be able to make the work that they do. And even seeing like someone like Doha Sar's show at the Tate Modern, like the obsessiveness that you would receive from creation doesn't really exist anymore in the same way. And I really miss that feeling as a maker myself. And so I feel challenged by it tremendously, and as a practitioner and as a person who actually wants to make change. And seeing my peers struggle like this, it's not okay. And so I think there's a lot we can do, not just from the bottom up, and to be expected for that, for us to do that work. So.
Yeah, there's a thing that we do a lot at the farm, which is mixing plaster. You take a bucket of water, and then you put the plaster in, and then you wait till the plaster have a little stick out of the water, like a little island. And then that's when you know it's one-to-one saturated. You stick your hand in it, and you stir it without leaving the bucket, because you then feel the lumps, and you keep touching, and then eventually you feel like it's good enough, and then you pour it into your mold, you cast it, and it becomes solid. And you know that it's an exothermic process, so it gives up heat. Then you put it back in the kiln, you heat it up, and it becomes crumbly, and then you can use it again, because the process is reversible. So first it's a hydration process, then it's a dehydration process, and then it's almost completely reversible because you can use it endlessly. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, what's important is stick your hand in the bucket. Mm-hmm. Let's feel this feeling and not leave, because when you mix and you take your hand out, then you create bubbles. You don't want bubbles. You want to stick your hand in it.
Well, thank you. That's given me a good idea of what's been going on, and good and bad in this kind of conversation. But what about? So I think a couple of you mentioned the kind of brands are having to be even more competitive, and unfortunately, sustainability seems to not be part of the conversation in the way that it was. So how can brands and companies reconcile this kind of need to make themselves more sustainable while remaining competitive, and also how do you keep pushing for that conversation to happen when so much else is going on in the world?
I mean, I think it's a really tricky question, but I guess it's like, well, what is competitive, and what's the bigger picture? The bigger picture at play is that our window for maintaining a livable future, and I say this with my daughter in the audience, is rapidly closing. And we know that, there is, I don't have to sit here and, fire stats at you. We know that, we all know that. And so, and I genuinely believe, we explore regeneration quite a lot with the clients that we're working with, and we're talking about what is a regenerative material and how can we actually heal the damage that has been done. And there's this kind of approach or this response that, this is like idealistic. And I would say that it's actually idealistic to think that we can carry on as business as usual. And so that's, for me, the mindset shift that has to happen, that actually to say that, exploring sustainability, and I would say needing to go one step further to circularity and regeneration is idealistic, is actually the wrong approach. To not be shooting for that is idealistic. And so I think once you can try and come from that perspective, and I do want to say that there are brands that are doing it, I sit in some incredibly invigorating spaces across all disciplines, and I think, sort of reframing this idea that, as I already mentioned, like we ran some events about circularity, and the first one was exploring how circularity does give economic advantage. And there's lots of evidence, from people like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that, whether you're embedding that in building, in product, that is going to, and probably the thing is over time, we've got to change our short-term perspective. And not over a long time, it's just a relatively short period of time that is going to result in economic advantage. So I think there's quite a bit of mindset shifting that needs to happen. There's, systems embracing that, this is a system. And I love this hands in, as Gwen was saying, the kind of hands dirty. That's what we're really passionate about, is reminding these brands are just made up of people. They're just people like you and I, and most of them have been to art college or design school, and they love getting their hands dirty, and they want to get reconnected with, and they've become specifiers because they're getting narrow, their window of time is narrower, so they're just having to choose from what is. But if we can, open that up a bit, give a bit more space, a bit more time, extend project cycles or work off project cycles and introduce, other options, then, super exciting things can happen.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the idea of something is and is not, it's so interesting. I kept thinking how, the surrealist painter says that, this is not a pipe. You know, I think there's a very, you know, from the Industrial Revolution to the point when the surrealists really picked out something really important that we are engaging with, you know, with the world, with the broader society, what is and what is not, you know. And I'm just thinking that because if you say, this is not plastic, oh no, this is glass, this is not plastic, when you say that, or you say this is not a car, okay, but it's a car, but it's not a car. We're not talking about a car. When you're describing the inside and outside, it's not a car, but it's a car. But this idea of what is and what is not, I think it's quite fundamental to what we're talking about. I don't know how you feel about this, but you know, I think that how we define matter seems to be really, central to this discussion.
Yeah, it seems we are trying to make new ideas in an old system.
Yes.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of what you do at Grimsdyke Farm is trying to find a space for experimentation that sort of goes beyond structures and also thinks about architecture as well. And I wonder if, architecture has some lessons for us in terms of long-term thinking, because obviously architects build for a different time span than perhaps designers design. So what could change around the kind of thinking about how we produce and consume that might help some of these, might make space for new ideas?
And part of experimentation is not to put labels on anything in particular, to say, this is
what this is, yeah. And Seetal, what you mentioned was a bit worrying because design has great thinkers, great innovators, great people graduating out of design schools, but you've sort of mentioned that they're struggling to find a space in the design industry or find the support in the design industry, and they're sort of leaning towards the art system. So are there things that design could do to kind of make space for more of this experimentation and open up a way to think about design differently than how we think about it now?
It's a really big question. I'm going to go really back to basics if I can. So when designing, there was a period where we were able to play. And I think that has been lost. Like, design education has been whittled down to a year to play. But you don't really play. You actually are given a series of briefs over a year, and therefore you have to produce something worthy enough to obtain an MA.
Yeah.
And that is so problematic, and there's no room to understand who you are through that process. And an MA, so this is an MA. So through that, you're kind of challenged by like what it is you're trying to achieve for yourself. Because an MA is very self-directed. And with that in mind, you're having to understand, where do I want to position myself? Because I often tell my students, there's 3 things I offer them. I say, what is it? What's your message? What do you want to change? And what's your position on it? Now, if you understand that after coming out of an MA, you're winning, because you created your own lane. Whereas these days, it feels like everybody's trying to do the same thing, and therefore they don't have a message. And to create that kind of space for yourself, you need time. And coming out of an MA with only a year to understand that, it's not enough. So that, in essence, needs to change. But I don't feel like that is going to change. So a lot of designers are having to kind of leave London to be able to create that space for themselves, to not be within this kind of cycle of like a loop, like a never-ending loop of creation. or feeling like, oh, they're left out of the conversation because they haven't made anything in 1 year. And so having points within the calendar where it's LDF or Craft Week or anything like that is a time that you can showcase things, but it's not the only time.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, design is every day. We make choices every day which are designed. So I don't think it's also looking at a big piece of furniture or, you know, a very sort of beautifully designed piece of art that you can sit on and it looks incredible. I don't think it's just that we need to look at either. So I think even my friend, Nefemi Marcus Bello, he's incredible. He's based in Lagos, Nigeria. And he talks a lot about anonymous design, design that isn't named. And that can be like a strainer or a colander or a saucepan and things like this, very everyday objects, but are so incredibly useful that actually have so much feeling because they become yours over a period of time. And those are the things we can add to. And I think going back to basics sometimes is kind of what's missing a little bit. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
That's okay, it was a big one. Marie, is there like space for experimentation in your department at Lotus? Are you kind of investigating ways things could be different, seeing things differently?
If I'm honest, I think that going back to some of your point, even in companies, the budget for advance is gone because everyone is trying to focus and survive the economic situation. So from a budget point of view, it's not there, but from a design mindset, we as designer, we always look into it, but of course, if you don't have budget or support, it's very difficult to go to the next phase because we are stuck to one phase where, yes, we have the ideas, we know where to do it, we have the right people on board, we know the supplier we could help and work with, because of course you can't do things alone. So it's a multiple element of people that needs to join the dots, work together, and after that, when you want to move to the next step is where you're stuck pretty much because, sorry, at the moment, we don't have the budget. So, but from our, at Lotus, at least we are still believing it and we are still pushing it. I think we need to, because otherwise if we're not doing it, no one else is going to do it. So, but going back to your comment, I think jobs are changing, unfortunately. Design is changing, engineering is changing, every job is changing. So for me, it's redefining everything. So a designer can't be just a designer. Sometimes, unfortunately, when I see students, they look at things to, I know is maybe a bit too naive in the interpretation of the world we are living, and they look at things that maybe too idealistic, unfortunately, and you feel like it's going to be tricky to move to the next phase. And sometimes you look into engineer, they are stuck into one way, and you're like, we can't move forward because your job needs to change, and your job needs to change. A designer needs to become an engineer in some ways. An engineer needs to be more creative. And I think everyone needs to look at how we need to change and adjust. I think we can't wait for, unfortunately, government to find solutions. We need to change ourselves. I educate myself. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to figure out okay, I can't do this again and again. That doesn't work. So I need to educate myself in that areas. I'm a bit more into, biochemistry, trying to understand what's going on here. Engineering, I'm trying to understand engineer too, because I need to learn the language, because I feel like it's not moving forward. So someone needs to do the first step. So I think it's our responsibility as individual to move and try not to be static, because if we are stick are fit to the ground too much, yes, you might grow as a tree,
Yeah.
but I don't think you can expand and reach out more people. And that's where we are today. I think people are frozen because we are scared, very scared. We don't know what's next. You know, AI is also a big thing. So people are like, what's the next step for this? Will that interact in my job? Will materials will have to change too for that? So I think that is, yeah, it's a big, big question, unfortunately, that is beyond just materials or design. I think everyone needs to kind of check barrier. I don't think, you know, if you go to school now, it would be difficult for me to recommend something to a kid, because I think just going to one area might be tricky, I think. I don't know what you guys think, but yeah.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry. I also think that designers need to design. It's not really, I don't see that happening that much at the moment, because I've worked with so many designers over the years, and they've often like overtaken the idea of like what a material can do. So they've almost imprinted and imposed their own kind of ego onto what the outcome should be. And I don't think they've understood how to work with a lot of the time. And so when I've kind of reframed, like earlier this year, I curated a show for Jorge Peñades about olive roots. And he basically made incredible pieces of furniture with that part of the tree. And it is a bit like wood, but it's also not. And the way he treated it was, I had to kind of reframe everything for him in a way where he's letting the material lead. And for that to happen, he had to let go of all his kind of ego. So we've been taught a lot of the time that designers have this like real sense of worthiness to be able to like continue that kind of narrative of like what a designer should be. It's not really about our name, actually. It's more about what possibilities our design actually creates. And so for others, essentially, and for ourselves. But at the same time, the material does that job for us. We need to like actually have that conversation with the material first. And so I got him to do that. And so I titled a lot of it, Designers Are Lazy. So they don't really want to spend the time to get to know that. So when it comes to actually designing, like a lot of people think that sustainability is expensive. It doesn't have to be. But if we design, then we might eliminate a lot of those issues, because as a designer, it's our job to actually do that work. The material is not going to save the world. We have to do the job for that to happen.
Yeah, did you want to say something?
I was just thinking if I was sitting in the audience, I'd be going, oh, shit. And I was just, because I think there's so many like rich threads of what we're all saying. Transdisciplinarity, I totally agree that the future of design education is there. Some institutions are there, some are lagging behind, and I totally agree about the play aspect and how to give that space and time, and I love what you're saying, Gwen, about the binary definition, like this is or this isn't, and that makes me think of a lot of the conversations we have with companies, that there's often this sense of like natural material good or synthetic material bad, and actually I was just trying to sort of think of what, is there some collective navigation through this, because I think there's so many disparate things going on within design, and I can't help but feel some kind of coming together is needed, and that makes me think about the title of the talk, and it really sounds like really sort of happy clappy and tree huggy, but for me it is about nature, and that goes back to this this binary definition idea that this is something and this is not, and ultimately everything is of nature. everything has come from nature. It's, you know, gone through a human transformation, and personally I think that's what we've become disconnected from. And in these very complex times in which we're all kind of working hard and feeling, personally, I speak for myself, feeling quite disillusioned, the thing that resources me is learning more about the natural world. So I think I've got very involved in an organisation called the Bioleadership Project, which is about people in leadership roles looking to nature's systems and cycles and what we can learn from that. And I can't help but think, if we're talking about the meta topic of sustainability and how if we know more about nature's systems, you know, that everything originates from nature, and understanding a bit more that process of harvesting. This is the thing I bang on about design education. I think we're missing the piece of this is harvested in this way, it goes through this process of transformation, and then, you know, at end of life, ideally, it goes back into this. I think we've lost that in design education. And when I was at Leeds University, like 20 years ago, I had to learn, you know, technical materials and technical materials cycles. And yeah, it was kind of dull, but it's really helped. And I'm not sure how many courses embed that now. So yeah, in a way, kind of reminding ourselves of this, that everything is of nature, even AI, even, you know, and establishing that deep interconnection, that everything is deeply interconnected, and, you know, impacting one piece impacts many others. And sorry if it sounds really abstract, but for me, it's the only way I can resource myself. And I wonder if there could be a bit more coming together around that. And the subject, the reason I kind of said yes to the talk was because the subject title resonated with me.
Yeah. Understanding nature as its own system as well. It seems to be that we kind of at some point maybe stopped in the Industrial Revolution. We showed mastery over materials. We came to think that we're more powerful than the natural systems around us by being able to control them.
And that we are of nature.
Yeah.
Like often I start very corporate settings with a breathwork session, which some people makes them very uncomfortable, but kind of reminding that we are, you know, deeply interconnected through breath, and it's, you know, all living things are sharing, you know, breath, and sort of reminding ourselves that we are living, breathing beings in a living, breathing planet, and like, holy shit, isn't that amazing? And it sounds like a bit too meta, but I kind of feel that that's maybe where we need to go, because there's so much complexity that we're dealing with. And I think, like, not to speak for everybody else, but I kind of feel like that's what we're all sort of touching on in a way.
Yeah. And Guan, what's interesting is I think we did a talk earlier this year about architects and designers who come to Grimsdyke Farm to kind of reconnect with making and materials, and, like you say, get their hands in the bucket, because perhaps they recognize that what they're doing every day on a screen or in meetings is completely separated from the actual making of stuff. So what do you think those architects and designers are seeking when they kind of come to Grimsdyke Farm and they want to be immersed in this different setting?
Yeah, I wanted to, just go back a little bit, this idea of change, right? Because I feel like there is a kind of a panic in the air with the change thing, but actually change is the only constant. Everything is constantly changing. So, I mean, for me, I'm thinking, well, you know, things are always changing. It's not a problem. Things are always changing. You know, instead of sticking yourself in the root, in the ground, if you're in the river, you are not in the same river twice. And, you know, but the thing that is interesting about change, there is another thing that's related to change. It's the rate of change, because it's divided by time. So something changing very quickly is not the same as something changing very slowly. So, you know, this is what I was saying about the hand in the bucket, because if your hand stays, you know what happens, right?
It's gonna get
because
stuck.
the plaster was set and your hand is stuck inside, and it can, there have been accidents like that you
Right.
have to be, your hand would have to chopped off.
Yeah.
But what I think is really interesting to invite people to come to the farm and play is that we're trying to get a slightly different pace from the ones that happens in the office, in the practice. Make this rate of change happen a little bit quicker so you can experience this. You use the word transformation. So how is transformation different from change? Yes, it goes from soft to hard, from liquid to solid. It's a kind of a change, but it's also transformation. And we need that kind of transformation that sometimes happen a bit quicker, that, because that reconnects us
Like
to
autonomy, to have some autonomy.
Yes, and especially architects working in an office when, it takes also cars many years to design a car and a building. But if they come to the farm and they decide that, well, we're gonna just make a chair, and within a few hours you make a chair and you sit on it, and that's kind of a whole transformation that takes place that relates to a time that you experience that change. And I think that's really, really important. And I recently added a new ingredient to this, which is my friend who's here, Marina, came to the farm and teach the participants how to sing.
Oh.
So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this yet,
Okay.
but it's been really good to be singing
Nice.
at the farm.
I guess that's not that different to breathing. You're doing it together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, because you have to find your voice, but you also have to find your the note. You have to find your note, because there's a note that is natural to you, like the breathing. Sorry,
Very
maybe off topic a little bit.
That's okay. Well, I think at this point we'll see if there's any questions in the audience. I think there are some microphones on both sides. I already see some hands up. I think a microphone is maybe on its way, or maybe you can shout out. There's one here. Yeah, do you want to go for it? Yeah. Okay.
About the cost of sustainability, someone mentioned that sometimes sustainability can be expensive.
Yeah.
Circularity can be an expensive process. And I give an example. I'm a furniture designer, and I try to source a material which was super sustainable. The first thing my client asks is, how much does it cost? What's the price you're going to charge for it? Sustainability was my concern. The other thing is I wanted to try something even nicer, but the person who was doing the whole long process to bring back, basically recycling something in a very fantastic way, was such a long process. It was so expensive. He couldn't charge me a price that I could pay as a designer, that nobody's going to buy my product. So I think sustainability is still expensive for the designer. What does need to change to make it less expensive?
Who wants to answer?
I think one of the problems is that we've become used to an unrealistic cost, that things are too cheap, because baked in is huge levels of social exploitation and, detrimental kind of environmental sustainability practices. So it's not a helpful answer, but that we have, it's unrealistic. The price of things is not the real price. So how do you counteract that? I guess communication plays a huge role. And I know people always talk about yes, it needs to be accessible and democratic, and I agree with that. This is not about pricing people out. However, we do have a really long-standing kind of example in the luxury goods market of people paying inflated prices for products that are exactly the same as things next to them, and it's just brand that differentiates it. And I think we often forget that, and you know, increasingly they are, you know, that luxury market or those brands become more accessible to a wider population. So there is that precedent that, you know, people are willing to pay more for. So communication plays a huge role. I always say I think a huge part of design is seduction, and I also believe that our metrics are wrong, you know, and this is sometimes we go into corporate spaces and say you've got to stop measuring GDP. This is the kind of the larger conversation that actually now we really need to be looking at social capital, we need to be looking at natural capital, and I believe that those metrics are going to become, you know, increasingly common to consider. There's a lovely organisation called the Capital Coalition, which is all about exploring the rise of exploration of social capital and natural capital, as opposed to just looking at economic bottom line. And I appreciate that sounds abstract at this point, but it's definitely something that's emerging. So I think the designer has a huge role to play in the communication piece, and I don't think it's about just walking away and saying this is more expensive, but also looking at over time. Because as I said, there are many examples. We've worked with an incredible professor from London Business School called Professor Ioannis Ioannou, and he has, all of his work is about proving that circularity and sustainability actually is more economically beneficial. And he shows time